figured it out. I figured it out from black and white.
Thank you all for coming out tonight. Just before I introduce Andrea, we have one more, at least for this year, guaranteed one in December. I have Father Dean Borgman coming to talk about racism. He's an Episcopalian priest from Gordon Conwell. But without further ado, Andrea, who has been a lifelong member of St. Facilius Church, received her undergraduate degree in applied violin from UMass Dartmouth and taught both violin and general classroom music for many years before returning to obtain her master's in education and counseling services from Salem State University. While completing the clinical portion of her graduate certificate program in school adjustment counseling, Andrea found her true calling as a clinical mental health counselor. She has worked in the mental health clinics within 2 major hospital systems, where she gained innumerable experience with a wide range of psychiatric disorders. She utilizes both cognitive behavioral and mindful approaches to her work with clients. Her clinical interests include post-traumatic stress disorder, anger management issues, anxiety, depression, grief, and loss. Andrea currently maintains a private psychotherapy practice here in Peabody, where she serves clients who present with a wide range of behavioral health concerns. Give a warm welcome to Andrea.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here tonight. I'm very, very excited about this. I want to begin by talking about all of the wild turkeys that have been invading our neighborhoods lately. All right. They seem to travel in massive gangs, and they are huge in stature. Right? They strut their stuff while they're walking through the neighborhoods, and as if they own them. Their colors range from light tan to very dark brown, and you never know when they're going to show up or how long they're going to stay. Their appearances seem very random, and some of these turkeys even leave behind a trail of destruction, warranting cleanups, if you catch my drift. By now, you may be asking yourself, why is she discussing wild turkeys? No, this is not a lecture on Thanksgiving meal ideas, but it is about thoughts. More specifically, intrusive, random, and unwanted ones. Just like these wild turkeys, they seem to pop into our minds at random. They can seem to travel in gangs, as in a flood of thoughts all at once. They can range in color, or more specifically, subject matter, which ranges from light to dark. And they can strut their stuff as if trying to say, we are here to rule your mind. And they can also leave a destructive path of mental distress behind them. Tonight, I will be providing a brief overview of the relationship of mental and spiritual health. I would like to begin with the disclaimer that I'm a psychotherapist and not a theologian. The thoughts and ideas presented are meant to be a starting point for discussion. And if at the end of the evening you have any specific questions related to counseling, I would be more than happy to help. But if you have specific questions related to spiritual health, please speak with Father Anthony. I also want to say that if at any point there's questions and you need to stop me, feel free to do so, okay? According to the Merriam-Webster Online Dictionary, the word psychology was formed by combining the Greek word psyche, meaning breath, principle of life, life, and soul, with logia, which comes from the Greek word logos, meaning speech, word, and reason. Today, psychology is concerned with the science or study of the mind and behavior. It is only natural that a discipline that includes the breath, the principle of life and soul, includes spiritual health. This will be the focus of tonight's discussion. How does psychotherapy relate to spirituality? There are many types of psychotherapeutic approaches in dealing with mental distress, and tonight we will focus on cognitive behavioral therapy, which is CBT, and mindfulness therapy. CBT is a structured, time-limited, evidence-based therapy which is aimed at modifying the faulty information that leads to psychological disturbances. In layman's terms, if we learn to change the way we think about a situation, we can change the way we react to it. In CBT, the focus is on 2 major categories of thoughts, rational and irrational. Rational thoughts are productive in nature and lead toward positive outcomes. Irrational thoughts or what we will refer to as assaultive or intrusive thoughts from this point forward, usually lead to some sort of emotional distress. In terms of spirituality, we have good thoughts which lead us toward Christ and assaultive thoughts which lead us away from him. What constitutes an assaultive or intrusive thought? Well, it is unwanted and emotionally distressing. It's difficult to ignore and is spontaneous and enters our awareness without any effort or intention. It may include a memory of a past trauma. It may be a reminder of a loved one's illness or death. You may even think to yourself, why did I make that comment in that meeting? I always have that intrusive thought. Or, I must have offended that person when I said that. David A. Clark, PhD, Professor Emeritus of the University of New Brunswick, Canada, states that 50% or more thought activity is involuntary. Negative intrusions can trigger a cycle of high emotional distress and other forms of problematic thoughts such as worry, rumination, obsessions, etc. So, is there a moral quality to some of our intrusive thinking? I think so. The church places a great emphasis upon our thoughts. Since this is a discussion about faulty thinking, we will be concentrating on what the church calls logismi, or assaultive thoughts. These are the thoughts or images that come to us and lead us away from Christ. The book Mountain of Silence by Kyriakos Markidis outlines the 5 stages of the development of a logismi. The first is the assault stage. The thought enters the mind. For example, someone might say, everyone around me seems so much more successful than I am. It seems pretty benign, right? Well, the second stage is interaction, engagement with that thought, giving reasons why the thought might be true. For example, because I am not as successful as everyone around me, there must be something wrong with me. The third stage is consent, agreeing to keep that dialogue going with the thought. By now, the thought is beginning to take on some validity in the mind in which it is an example of the irrational nature of the thought. If I were a better person, I would be more successful. The fourth stage is defeat. It's when we succumb to that thought. I'm a bad person because I am not as successful as everybody else. And the fifth and final stage is passion or obsession. The thought has become an absolute truth in the mind, and the person is unable to see any other point of view. There is no hope for me to ever become successful because I am bad and unworthy of success. Each stage of a logismi denotes a downward progression in the thought process, bringing us further away from Christ. Did you notice at each stage it got more intense and more personal and a little bit more difficult to remove yourself emotionally? It's like you're emotionally attached to that thought now, and you tend to believe it. Okay, and it just started with an innocent, oh, everybody around here looks so successful. And then it turns into, there's no hope for me. I'm bad, I'm unworthy. So the church teaches us that we are all icons of Christ. A very wise spiritual father once explained it this way. Think of a very old icon that has been recently uncovered at an archaeological site. It is dirty, it has layers of dirt and grime on it. But does this mean that that icon cannot be restored to its original glory if it were properly and lovingly restored? Absolutely not. This is the same with us. Life situations can leave us with so-called layers of mental distress, such as trauma, grief, anger, etc. If we take the time to restore our mental and spiritual health, we will uncover Christ who lives within all of us. Another therapeutic technique aimed at reducing negative thought patterns is called sensory awareness, which is a grounding technique. The intent of such an exercise is to take the focus off of the distressing thought. One approach is to choose a nearby object and imagine how the 5 senses play a role in its existence. For example, how does that object look, sound, feel, taste, and smell? So let's say you were just in an argument with somebody and some unwanted, intrusive thoughts entered your mind. You happen to look up and you see a rose bush. By utilizing this technique of running through the senses, it can help to ground you. The roses smell fragrant and beautiful. The colors are soft, yet so vibrant to look at. The petals are soft and silky, while the stems are thorny and sharp. The sound of a rose, now that one would take some imagination, but I can only imagine the sound someone would make if he were stuck by one of those thorns. And have you ever enjoyed the experience of a rose-flavored treat? After completing such an exercise, the level of distress is greatly reduced, if not completely eliminated. The church offers us spiritual grounding via our senses. Through sight, we have icons. Sight is the primary sense. We need to look at everything. And you become like what you look at. If you surround yourself with peaceful and calm images, your inner peace will be enhanced. Just the opposite is true for those who surround themselves with images that are unwholesome, for they lead to sinful thoughts, resulting in the worry, rumination, and obsessions that were mentioned earlier. For sound, we have the hymns, we have the sound of the censer, we have the readings of the prayers. Learning the hymns of the church can help us in our day-to-day lives. Think back to that person who was defeated by the logisme of thinking he was a bad person for not being successful enough. Instead of consenting to that logisme, imagine if he were to chant the hymn, "The wealthy have become poor and hungry, but yet those who seek the Lord shall not lack for any righteous thing." Touch is another powerful sense and is offered to us through the anointing with holy oil, when Holy Communion touches our lips, the laying on of hands during ordination, kissing icons. Just imagine the miraculous nature of a parent's kiss to an injured child. The kiss is part of the cure in that it heals the emotional pain that the child is feeling at the time. Once the child is feeling calm and secure, the next step of treating the wound can take place. We taste Holy Communion. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Psalm 34:8. We smell incense. Think of how specific fragrances can bring you back to a specific moment in time and enlighten your senses. Another often recommended therapeutic technique is the use of mantras, meditation or positive self-affirmations. Very often, the focus of mantras is the self. The church, however, prescribes prayer. Meditation in church is a form of prayer through us to God. All prayer is a form of meditation, but not all meditation is a form of prayer. The distinction is that prayer places our focus on God. The downfall of the wrong sort of meditation is pride. Learn to pray the Jesus prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. In closing, I would like to remind you all that we have just begun to scratch the surface of this topic. In my experience, what the church prescribes for our spiritual health is what the textbooks of psychology have taught me. What the church prescribes for our spiritual health is what my clinical training has reinforced within me. A tree may appear healthy on the outside, but if it is rotting from within, it'll eventually weaken and may even topple over under the stress. The same goes with us. We need to attend to our inner peace so that when the storm hits, and we all know that our lives are full of unexpected storms, we will be spiritually and mentally able to withstand the winds and to remain standing. Thank you. I encounter stigma almost daily in my practice, and it's something that makes me incredibly sad. When people come in, and I work with tons of men, he's really in rough shape, and he said, but I'm a guy. I'm not supposed to be weak. It's not a sign of weakness. What I tell people is that my role is really as an educator, okay? Don't think of me as a therapist. Don't think of me sitting up here and you sitting down here. We're on equal par, and we're having a dialogue. There's information that you don't know how to access. It's all within you, right? So I'm just here to kind of give you a couple hints. It's like if you go to a personal trainer, right? I might not know how to do that exercise, or I might have seen it on the internet, but there's just something that's not working and I'm not toning up the way I want to tone up. So you come to me and I can give you a few pointers and kind of tweak the process for you. I had a little boy come in today, he's 13, and when I said to him, you know, can I ask you why you think you're here? He says, because I'm crazy. And I looked at him and I said, no, you're not. You're here to learn. There's something you're struggling with, and I'm here to help you. And we worked on that relationship. And he was so much more comfortable and happy at the end of the sessions. That's what I would tell people. Like, there is no stigma. We all need help in areas. So think of if you are looking for psychotherapy for yourself, think of it as a class. You're going to go learn something. If I know I'm going into like a stressful meeting, or you know, I know that I'm feeling extremely tired and the kids are going to be coming home and I'm not going to have a whole lot of patience, I might sit in my car for 5 extra minutes before I walk through the door and say a prayer and just ask God to help me be as peaceful as I can be, okay? In my office every day, I have the icon that Father Chris had brought when he blessed my office, and I have it on my desk right in front of me. So no matter what, it's there. And my desk is always a mess, but I'm always moving things around to expose the icon. But what I do is when I start my day, I say this prayer, and I think I got it. It was one of the books that we read for the Sisterhood of St. Macrina. Okay, it was one of our books. Lord, teach me to be patient and kind, just like your angels. And that really speaks to me because I can be very impulsive with my thoughts. I can be very anxious with my thoughts. I can get angry. I can get launched by what I would call a stupid comment by a coworker. But I go back to that prayer, and it's helped. I said I was going to leave the spiritual to Father Anthony, but I answered that piece. For me, that's what works for me. But it's like, again, I'm going to bring it back to if you're practicing an instrument, do you just show up at the recital and expect to play every note? Or do you have to practice it? You have to practice every day. And you have to practice multiple times a day. So what I recommend to people is to set aside 5 minutes 3 times a day and just practice these scenarios in your head. And how can I be patient with this? And the more you practice it, the more it's going to become part of you. You're going to have slip-ups. You're going to yell at your kids. I can't tell you that you're ever going to not get upset at a meeting. So you want to practice more. And then there are meditation techniques that you can use. There are different prayers that Father can guide you to. There are the grounding techniques. You know, the grounding technique is phenomenal. Because think about that picture, and you have to go through the 5 senses. What does it smell like? Really? You got to be pretty creative, right? So you got to kind of get into the picture, and I'm thinking, oh, all right, I'm smelling like, you know, the nice fresh mountain air. Or, you know, what does it taste like? Well, I don't want to know what the actual picture tastes like, right? But that grounding technique is to take your mind away from it. Isn't it better for you to daydream a little bit in the meeting and miss something that somebody said than to spout your mouth off?
I'm just going to give you 2 examples. One is about myself and one from a very experienced priest who told me about this. I used to drive a lot, I told in the Bible study yesterday. And one problem I had, especially because I was very stressed about a certain thing, I was working, but my mind was always at this particular thing, and I was always with it. So what I would do is drive, and that was the best time I could concentrate on that thing. But what happened was I was never paying attention when I was changing lanes, because my mind was always there. But what I did is, every time I made a habit and I exercise, it takes exercise to get into a routine. Every time I was getting into the car, I would make the sign of the cross. When I was getting into the highway, I would make sign of the cross, which, like I said yesterday, it actually brought me back to the present and grounded me in God, in the moment, at that place, and made me aware of my environment where I was. And to be honest, I learned that when I was watching the 60 Minutes about the Mount Athos, they were taking a video of the monk who was getting into the car to go get something. And he crossed himself, he crossed the car before he got in, and then he drove. So I think the overall answer is, from spiritual perspective, that we ground in God and let God be with us and do our job. But that takes a lot of practice. And making the sign of the cross was really successful. I realized that it kind of goes away, because this logisme that Andrea mentioned, it's actually injected into us by the evil one, or those are like wandering thoughts that the evil one has placed in the air, and they're just traveling through our mind. They don't stay very long, but they stay with us for a while, as long as it takes to get us in trouble. The second thing that I said, a very experienced priest, over 50 years he's been in priesthood, in a very, very busy parish, he said, I always had 1 hour in the altar every single day. It didn't matter how many phone calls I had, it didn't matter how many people were waiting for me. If it was my hour to be in the altar, I dedicated that 1 hour to God and to myself, and sit there and just forget about everything. It's called self-care in psychology, because the priests get burned out. So that's a self-care that grounds you back again into God, where God is with you at all times.
In that book, Our Thoughts Determine Our Lives, there's a quote in there. I actually use it in my clinical practice all the time, that thoughts are like airplanes. So I happen to live in the flight path to Logan, so there are planes going over my house all the time. So if I want to spend my day listening out for all that noise, what's my head going to be like? If I want to turn my head into the landing pad for those planes, what's my head going to be like? I'm going to have a pretty big headache. I might be cranky at the end of the day, right? So if you can think of these thoughts that come in that we feel like we have to react to, it's just an airplane. It's going to be gone in a second. But if we entertain it and we create a landing pad in our brain, then, I mean, I don't know. I don't think I'd be able to sleep at night if I had a whole airport full of planes. Don't give the thought room to grow. Just because it comes in there doesn't mean you have to talk back to it. And when we react, we're talking back to it, and we're entertaining it and engaging it. It definitely does not help if you're lonely. And unfortunately, a lot of people who are suffering with anxiety or depression find the intensity of the symptoms so severe that they tend to withdraw. So they isolate themselves, and then, you know, how many times are you going to call up that friend and the friend makes an excuse not to want to go out because they don't, you know, they're not telling you, I'm too anxious to go out, because they're embarrassed, right? So they're making up these, what you may think are ridiculous excuses. Well, you're going to stop reaching out, and then, you know, networks of friends just kind of dissipate, and these folks are left alone and isolated. This is just my own experience here, is that the folks that are lonely cling to their faith more strongly. When I was working at the hospital, I found that the faith is what helped to sustain the most severely mentally ill and get through the worst of times. I would look at some of these folks and just be in awe of the amount of strength and the perseverance that they had. And then they would start talking about their spiritual life. And I always ask during my intake process, do you ascribe to any spirituality, or is there any religion that you would like to bring into therapy? And if they say yes, we will talk about things in therapy. And I think a lot of folks find that really refreshing. A lot of clinicians are afraid to even go there. And I'm like, I love it. I'm like, bring it on, because this is the stuff I know and I'm passionate about, right? So I can help you in this area. I can help in other areas too, but you know what I mean? But I find that faith communities, you know, we're all family. It's miraculous that, you know, we're all walking the same path, and week after week you encounter folks. You feel better when you're with your family, for the most part. And are we going to get upset with our family every now and then? Absolutely. but we're all walking the same walk together, and we share the common faith, and we receive communion as a family, and we're there to hold each other up, and that's another added. I don't want to be blasphemous, but I feel like it's a benefit to me. I feel good when I go to church and I see everybody, and it's like, oh, just the connections that you make. And I think that in the secular world, you might send people to, well, go to that knitting club, go to that, whatever the community aspect is, because people need other people to. And I'm not saying like you need people to feel good about yourself, but just being around other people makes you feel good. Sometimes. I would say people maybe 40 and up have more of a reliance on their faith base, and they maybe attend worship services, or they have traditions within their home and their family, whether they're doing it to please parents. I can't really speak to why they're engaged, but I find that probably like from ages 18 to maybe 30, 32, there's a disconnect in how to interact with people. They're into their gaming. I can't believe how much time I spend talking about video games with clients. It makes me sad. And I feel like I'm judging them. I'm like, go outside, like get some fresh air, and as a big person myself, I really can't speak to people being overweight, but the amount of obesity that I'm seeing, and I'm talking morbid obesity in younger clients, and they de-stress by sitting in front of the video games. And I have to do a lot of psychoeducation to tell them that's the worst thing you can be doing, because you're lighting up everything in your brain, and you shouldn't be playing those before you go to bed, and there's no connection with many of these clients, with people. It's their gaming network. You can hide behind the screen. You don't need to be your full self. You can be whatever you want to be in cyber world, right? Nobody's going to know that you're in your sweats and you haven't taken a shower in a week. But I think that feel like they don't need religion. They don't need spirituality. Like, they're cool. They got it all under control, And I think that because I spoke a little bit about it in here, is that the focus for many years has been on, say, mantras and the I. When I was teaching, use your I messages, what I need, right? It's me, 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 me. And I think we need to come back to like a community. Like, what does everybody need? I can't tell you how many times I would be in a conference with a parent when I was teaching, and the kid was bullying another kid, and I would say, well, the other child, maybe the other kid was on the autism spectrum, right? And you'd say, well, the other child has a tough time, with interacting with other people. And the mother would say, I don't care about the other kid. I only care about my kid. We're talking about my kid. And that's the attitude now. It's like me, me, me. And I think it was well-intentioned, with I messages like I'm feeling this, or, it's placing the emphasis on me and not trying to blame other people. But I think that they feel like they're cool. I met with some folks a couple weeks ago that were like, yeah, like we believe in God, but like we just do our own thing, and like we're good. We know who we are.
That was a discovery for me, and I'm going to base on what Andrea said, is that when you are in a community, in this modern society, we are afraid of being judged. We label it judgment, and we don't want to be judged. But in reality, when you interact with someone, it's automatically bringing judgment. In which way? Well, I come, to have a conversation with you. Well, I have a beard and you have a beard, so it kind of is a judgment, right? Tim is a cool guy. He has a beard like me.
Yours looks better.
Or he doesn't have a beard. Well, so what does it do to me? It makes me think. Well, it's really inconvenient to have a beard. This guy is really smart. I should probably become like him. So if I didn't see another person I wouldn't be judged. You don't judge me directly saying, you gotta go and shave your beard. No. I already, by interaction, I leave mark in your life and you leave mark in my life. And that's what happens in the community where we grow together. There's a great movie Russians made. It's called The Pope, which is like a priest, meaning not the Pope like in Rome. And in that movie, it shows the priest and his wife's relationship. At the end, the wife gets sick. This is during World War II. She gets like typhoid, and she goes into the woods to die alone because there were lots of kids in the house and she didn't want to. And there's a phrase there when he comes home and finds a note on a desk that she said, "I'm sorry, I couldn't stay. I had to go away and die in the woods because I didn't want to infect everybody in the house." He starts crying and he says, "You were my grinding stone. Why did you leave me?" What does that mean? She was really like tough on him and he was the humblest guy. But what he says in that thing that you were shaping me. You were my grinding stone. Well, it's not really comfortable to be put to a grinding stone. It feels terrible, it hurts, but change hurts. So the community helps us to grow, but because we're becoming more and more isolated society, our egos grow very big, and we don't want to hear anybody look at us and tell us something wrong with us. We always have to say, that's okay, that's another form of behavior. Now, in a loving community, in a church, that can be done in a very loving way. As a loving person, as a loving member of family, like Andrea said, that's a different thing. But when we are afraid of any change, our egos are so high that we don't want anybody to tell us something is wrong with us, then we isolate and we sit in front of our computer because our computer does what we tell it. It doesn't talk back, it doesn't correct us or anything. So then we react with these millions of people over the internet and we feel cool because there's nothing to compare to. In the Christian tradition, they say that a lone Christian can only be lost. What does that mean? It means that a Christian is Christian in the community. And you can extend that to a person. You cannot be a person without another person because you see yourself, who you are, in the reflection of the other person. When you come across with another person, you find out who you are by relating to that person. In other words, you see your reflection in that other person. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Figured it out. I figured it out from black and white.